We're delighted to welcome you to our class tonight, and we're thankful to Monty Everly for bringing in a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. And we're glad to be able to have it on video for our class and be archived. But what would this be? Those are the staves. And when or how long were they to stay there? They were always to be there, weren't they? All right, what are these? Those are the cherubs, okay, on the top. And you see the wings are touching. So right in here, between the cherubs would be what?
Mercy seat.
That's the mercy seat. And what would come down on it?
The blood.
The Shekinah, which indicated what?
God's presence.
The presence of Jehovah in the tabernacle, which also indicated what? Their fellowship with Jehovah. But what indicated their fellowship with Jehovah when the Shekinah was on the mercy seat? What did all of that indicate for Israel? Why could they have fellowship? Jehovah said, I will what? I will dwell among you. I'll be in your midst. And that was a record of that. All right, now inside you would have how many items?
3.
3. What are they? 10 words, pot of manna, and Aaron's rod that budded. All right? And since we are priests, we took the top off, and they are in there. We put it up high. After class, we will move it back to the floor, and if y'all would like, very carefully, you can remove the top and look. Now, Monty, who built this?
Grant Mullins, he is the elder at the Walnut Grove Church of Christ.
Grant Mullins built this, and Monty has used it a lot of places, and we appreciate your bringing it to us. And I hope for those of you who are studying with us on video, that would give you some kind of a visual that might even be better than the slides or maybe some pictures that you have been able to see. It gives you a hands-on view, and we appreciate that so very much. All right, tonight we move to the 26th chapter of the book of Exodus. And we began this chapter last time, and we covered Roman numeral 1 in your handout. Tonight we begin with Roman numeral 2, the curtains for the tabernacle. That's the first 6 verses of chapter 26, and then where they are built, chapter 36, 8 through 19. Now the first word in 26 is what? Moreover. Now what does that mean? I'm sorry? All right, including, Elvin, you said something else, didn't you?
I thought it was supersede.
Supersede?
Yeah.
No. Moreover is like an in continuation and continuing. Some people who misread their Bible, didn't know how to deal with words, said that moreover led a pack of dogs that came and licked Lazarus' sores. Because the Bible says, moreover, and the dogs came and licked his sores. So when you're dealing with hermeneutics, you have to help people sometimes because they miss it. Like the man who referred to Acts chapter 8 and kept talking about the Ethiopian unch. And so sometimes people miss it. So moreover, just continuing, it shows you don't click. That what we started back in chapter 25, we are continuing. The tabernacle, that which appertained to it. And it also shows that the authority of Jehovah continues behind the instructions. If you've ever been sworn in to testify in court, you are told you're under oath. If you're dismissed as a witness but then recalled, generally you are reminded you are still under oath. So this says this is still under the authority of Jehovah, who gave all we've read before it. Moreover, you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine woven linen and blue, purple, and scarlet thread, with artistic designs of cherubim. You shall weave them. So they are to make the tabernacle. Tabernacle here means a residence, literally, and specifically the tabernacle, and properly its wooden walls. You'll read about the staves that are made later on. Now we know at Shiloh, apparently they had erected some kind of structure, because you had those who were at the door of the tabernacle itself. And apparently they had reared some kind of frame that was there, though we're not given any details. But we have then the fine linen curtains, 10 curtains, each 42 feet long, 6 feet wide, and made of the finest linen, blue, purple, and scarlet, with cherubs woven on them. The American Standard calls it fine twined linen. And here you have linen, the threads of which are formed of several fine strands twisted together. Then you deal the skillful workman. These materials, we are told, one writer said, were scarce and expensive. So how do we then account for the children of Israel being able so readily to produce this?
The plunder that they took from Egypt.
Very likely. These came from Egypt, very likely. This is, you remember when they left, they borrowed, they asked of their neighbors, a number of things. And these may have been a part of it. You are to have 5 curtains that are to be woven together. 5 curtains that are woven together, coupled together. 2 sets of these equaling 10. One writer said, number 4, to describe how the curtains were placed side by side, the Hebrew uses the, and that should be idiom, but the Sikh tells you, I quoted it accurately, and then I gave you what it ought to be. A woman to her sister. Literally it says, a woman to her sister. Idea side by side. That's that Hebrew idiom. They talked about a woman to her sister. They meant something side by side. Loops of blue were to be made upon the edge of the curtain, verse 4, from the edge on either side. In this coupling, and also in the edge of the curtain that is outmost in the second coupling. And one writer says that this was to prevent raveling. So you had a narrow border, often of different or heavier threads than the fabric, sometimes in a different weave, he said, which would keep it from raveling. So see how they are giving, and here's what I'm emphasizing. You could just read the details, but here's what I want you to emphasize. Attention to detail. Minute attention to detail. It had to be just so. It wasn't throw something together. It wasn't do the best you can. It wasn't just do something. Here's the pattern. Here's how it has to be, or it's not right. Now, as you look at this and you're studying with people, you need to talk about one church is not as good as another. Would one way to weave this thread be as good as another, or must it be woven the way it's specified? See, somebody comes along and says, what difference does it make? It makes all the difference in the world. It's the difference in it being accepted or rejected. All right? Our obedience to what God says makes the difference in our being saved or lost. So the church of which we are a member makes the difference as to whether we're in the saved body, Ephesians 5, or we're in the lost body. So one church could never be as good as another. And back here, see, this is a very simple illustration, but generally most people can see it. And they can tie it together. Then in verse 5, 50 loops were to be made in the one curtain, 50 loops to be made in the edge of the curtain that is in the second coupling. The loops were to be opposite one to another. Verse 6, 50 clasps of gold were to be made, and the curtains were to be coupled one to another with the clasps. So notice he not only tells you how to make them, he tells you how to put them together. What's supposed to hold them. So detail. Then verse 6, the tabernacle was to be one whole. Note that the linen curtains formed a covering called the tabernacle. And that word, tabernacle, means dwelling. All right? Who's going to dwell there? God is. So here's the dwelling place of God. You fellas want to work up a good sermon. I've spent a lot of time on it. The places where God dwells. We know He dwells or dwelt in the tabernacle. He dwelt in the temple. He dwells in the church. He dwells in the individual Christian. And each of those places has to be pure in order for Him to dwell therein. Each of those places has to meet His pattern in order for Him to dwell there. And that would make you a good lesson to help people see how important the church is, how important the Christian is. And parallel it with the tabernacle and the temple and the stress on the purity that was contained therein. That Ephesians 5, He washed the church that He might present it to Himself glorious, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing. Should be holy and without blemish. All right, you get to verse 8. And you have the length of the curtains, and then he tells you how to couple the curtains and how to put them together. Now go to chapter 36. And this New King James over verse 8 gives the title, Building the Tabernacle. Verse 8, then all the gifted artisans, the wise-hearted men, among them who worked on the tabernacle, made how many curtains? Why 10 curtains? That's the pattern, wasn't it? Then it tells how they were woven and how they were designed, and then you're given the length and the coupling, and you're given the loops, verse 11, and verse 12, and then the clasps in verse 13. Now, in some translations, the word Betzalel is inserted in the text, and the text states that he made them. The subject of the last verb, made, in 36:8 is not stated, but the verb is singular. He made them. And that's true in verses that I've given you in D, 10, 11, 13, and so forth. So this writer says it is probable that the subject is Betzalel, as in 37:1. The ASV, the American Standard, supplies this reading in italics. Possibly the subject is indefinite and refers to whichever craftsman did the work. So if you find a translation that has Betzalel in it, it's because of the singular word that you he made them. But we could not be dogmatic about that. Any questions or comments on the curtains? All right, then we move to chapter 26, verses 7 to 14. And we have the goatskin tent cloth. And the making of it, chapter 36, verses 14 to 19. Verse 7, you shall make curtains of goat's hair to be a tent over the tabernacle. You shall make 11 curtains. So it was to be a tent. Now look at that word, 1 under 8. Ohale. Ohale is to be a tent over the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Ohale, Mishkan. Look at those words. One is tent, the other is tabernacle. Right, verse 7, there are to be 11 curtains. Now you had 10 one time. Now you have 11. Would it matter which was which? Yeah. Each curtain is to be 45 feet long, 4 cubits wide, 6 feet, according to verse 8. Verse 9, 5 curtains were to be coupled by themselves, and then 6 curtains were to be coupled by themselves. And then the 6th curtain was to be doubled over in the forefront of the tent. Minute. Here's the way it's to be. Verse 10, 50 loops were to be made on the edge of the one curtain that is outmost in the coupling, and 50 loops upon the edge of the curtain which is outmost in the second coupling. Verse 11, 50 clasps of brass were to be made. 50 bronze clasps. And put the clasps into the loops and couple the tent together that it may be one. Be one. Little a under 6. Echad, from akkad to unified. It's to be together. It's to be unified. It's to be one. This may be incidental, but I wonder if this is not a twofold idea. Number 1 is to be one curtain. But number 2 is to stress unity. That is to be signified by God's dwelling in that tabernacle in the midst of Israel to imply fellowship with the nation. Now, if the nation is divided, then you've broken that oneness. I wouldn't be dogmatic, but there could at least be somewhat of an application to that. And you'll notice that the goat's hair coverings in verse 11 are called the tent, the ohel. So here's the ohel, and you'll follow that word with the mishkan. Verse 12, the overhanging part of the curtains of the tent was to hang over the back of the tabernacle, the mishkan. And verse 13, the cubit of material that remained in the length of the curtains on each side was to hang over the sides of the tabernacle, the mishkan, to cover it. And the first covering could not be seen from the outside. Now, what you have, see, you go through here, and there's your holy place. And then back here would be what? Most holy. And somewhere right in there would be what? The veil. And then on one side you would have the table of showbread. On the other side, the candlestick, the lampstand. So you will see this when you see a lot of pictures of the temple in Jerusalem. You will have this kind of a structure in the midst of a big structure. This is your holy place, your most holy place. So notice how what's on top of it, on the sides of it, and in front of it, and behind it are specified in detail. Nothing is just left to being haphazard. Drop down to verse 14. You shall also make a covering of ram skins dyed red for the tent, and a covering of badger skins above that. Seal skins, the American Standard says. The English Standard says goat skins. And scholars are not sure what the Hebrew word literally means. One writer said this may refer to some kind of bag in which the tabernacle was carried when it should be they journeyed. R. Allen Cole wrote, it seems that some sort of leather tent bag or wrapper was provided for transportation. Well, that would make sense. At least would be reasonable that you would have that would protect it. Because there would be time that they would be moved in rain, possibly. Times it would be exposed in the moving. So you have protection. The outer protection. Now you get to chapter 36, verses 14 to 19. You read in detail that the tent cloth and the outer protection were made, and if you are marking in your Bible as we go along, according to the pattern. If it were my Bible, I would mark that every time it's used. There are certain phrases that if you mark them, they catch your eye when you're flipping through and you may be trying to find a point. And you have things like according to the pattern, according to the commandment of Jehovah which he gave to Moses, those kinds of things. That tells you they're being done by divine direction. They're being done according to divine instruction. And so many times you will have the word of Jehovah, thus says Jehovah, and then you will have they acted according to the word of Jehovah. So that means Jehovah gave the revelation and they were obedient to the revelation. Questions or comments on the tent cloth? Not spending a lot of time on it because you can read the details, and that's what's emphasized here, is that you make it according to the pattern. In verses 15 to 29 and chapter 36, 20 to 34, you have the boards and bars for the tabernacle. Verses 15 to 25, you have the boards. Made of perpendicular boards covered with curtains. The boards were then covered with gold. Verse 15, for the tabernacle you shall make the boards of acacia wood, King James Shittim wood, standing upright. So you're making the boards for the Mishkan, standing upright. They are to be 10 cubits long, 15 feet, and a cubit and a half wide, 27 inches. And then you are to, in verse 17, you have the tenons. And this, New King James, gives a marginal reference, projections for joining, literally, hands. A projecting member, the tenon is, in a piece of wood or other material for insertion into a mortise to make a joint. So each board joined together. Verses 18 and 19, the boards for the south, the Negev. South, you'll read that a lot. Sometimes you'll have Negev in the text. It means the south, southern district of Judah, occasionally Egypt, south of Palestine, the south side of the tabernacle. The south as being on the right hand of a person, facing what? East. Facing east. You're dealing with south. See how north, south, east, west is important when you're reading about the tabernacle. Certain things on certain sides. Tabernacle always faced which way? Faced to the east. So you have these directions. Verse 18, there are to be 20 boards. Verse 19, 40 sockets of silver were to be made under the 20 boards, 2 sockets under each board for its 2 tenons. Right now notice, you've had some things that were to be made of gold. Now you have some things that were to be made of silver. We've had some things that were to be made of bronze. Could you get them mixed up and everything be all right? Now I know you know the answer to that. I'm stressing that for a reason. We need to get that in our heads. Because we ought to be studying with people, and if we are, denominational people, are going to ask questions. Well, does it really make any difference? That's a major question you'll get on any number of subjects. All right? Here is something that doesn't have anything to do with a denomination or a practice that maybe they are trying to understand, that just illustrates the principle. It does make a difference. It does make a difference. See, some people, when it comes to baptism, don't understand the word means to dip or plunge or immerse. So they think sprinkling or pouring is baptism. They'll call it that. And they will say, well, does it make any difference? Does it really make any difference? Yes. I remember when I lived in Talladega, Alabama, I was studying with a person who was a Methodist. And we were talking about that. And so I just picked up the phone there in the study and called the Methodist preacher, who was about 3 buildings down from our building. And I told him what I was doing, and I said, this question's been raised. I'd just rather get it from the source. What do you teach about baptism? And he said, we will accept the person on their christening, or we will pour water over them, or we will immerse them. They have a choice. Well, they don't have a choice if they're going to obey the Lord. Detail makes a difference. Y'all see that? I know you do, but you can use that in helping people. understand it. So those are the boards for the south. Verses 20 and 21, you have the boards for the north side of the tabernacle. 20 boards, verse 20. 40 sockets of silver under the 20 boards, 2 sockets under each board for its 2 tendons, verse 21. The boards of the hinder part of the tabernacle westward, which in this case comes from a root meaning to roar. So it's a sea, which would reference the Mediterranean Sea in Palestine. You're going north up toward Lebanon, and then east you have the desert across the Jordan River, and then west you have the Mediterranean Sea. And that's often the way they would tell difference. 6 boards are to be made. 2 boards are made for the corners of the tabernacle on the west side. These boards were to be double beneath and entire unto the top under one ring. 8 boards and 16 sockets of silver were to be made. There would be 2 sockets per board. Look at little d. Some scholars conclude that the boards were trellis-like frames, which provided a framework for the tabernacle and its coverings, but through which the priest could see the inner covering. Boards that were frames, he says, would not be as heavy. Remember, in the marching, they're going to have to take this thing down. And they're going to have to carry it, haul it, and then they're going to have to set it back down. Now that's heavy. This ark is heavy. So if everything were heavy, it'd be quite a burden on those Levites that were to take all of that down. And then you look at the bars, verses 26 to 29. They are to be made of acacia wood, the shittim wood. Again, specificity is laid down. Verse 31 of chapter 36, the text said, he made bars of acacia wood. So reiterate, all right, here's the pattern, here's what we did. Here's the pattern, here's what we did. There were to be 5 bars for the boards of each side of the tabernacle. The middle bar in the midst of the boards was to pass through from end to end. The boards were to be overlaid with gold. Their rings were to be made of gold. They were for places for the bars, and the bars were to be overlaid with gold. And you get to verse 20 of chapter 36 through verse 34. The boards and bars were made according to the pattern. You will see repeated here then gold, silver, and bronze in connection with the tabernacle. Certain things are to be gold, certain things silver, certain things bronze. Now, King James American Standard, brass. Some believe, and from more discoveries, that bronze probably is the better reading. That's probably correct. Best I can tell. Gold, silver, bronze. Does that ring a bell? What bell does it ring? Okay. Does that ring a biblical bell? Nebuchadnezzar dreamed 3 of those 4 empires represented by gold, silver, and bronze. Leading up to the 4th, during which the God of heaven would set up a kingdom. So the gold represented in Nebuchadnezzar's dream what nation, what empire?
Babylon,
Babylonian. Silver,
Medo-Persian,
Medo-Persian. Bronze,
Greek,
Grecian. Then you come down to the part iron, part clay,
Rome.
Rome. And then you have the kingdom that shall never be destroyed, the church. So see, if you learn these back here and the significance of them, you have a background to Daniel 2 as far as the colors. That meant something to Jews. They were familiar with that, see. It wasn't just something thrown out there that was brand new to them. Questions or comments on the boards and bars? Now, when you get to verse 30 of chapter 26, you shall raise up the tabernacle according to its, what do you have there? Pattern, which you were shown where? On the mountain. Now, if you go back to chapter 25, look at verse 9. According to all that I show you, the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings, just so you shall make it. Verse 40 of chapter 25, and see to it that you make them according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain. And verse 30 of chapter 26, you shall raise up the tabernacle according to its pattern which you were shown on the mountain. And the word fashion or pattern here, mishpat, means a plan. There's a plan. And this had been shown to Moses on the mount. Now turn to chapter 40. Then Jehovah spoke to Moses, saying, on the first day of the first month, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. You shall put in it the ark of the testimony, and partition off the ark with the veil. You shall bring in the table and arrange the things that are to be set in order on it, marked in order. And you shall bring in the lampstand and light its lamps. You shall also set the altar of gold for the incense before the ark of the testimony, and put up the screen for the door of the tabernacle. Then you shall set the altar of the burnt offering before the door of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. And you shall set the laver between the tabernacle of meeting and the altar, and put water in it. You shall set up the court all around, and hang up the screen at the court gate. And you shall take the anointing oil and anoint the tabernacle and all that is in it. And you shall hallow it and all its utensils, and it shall be holy. And then he goes on to what they are to do. Now, they had a pattern by which the tabernacle was to be made. They had a pattern as to how the tabernacle was to be raised. There's a pattern. We have not yet read all the details that are mentioned there, but we've read enough of them to understand. When you get to chapter 40, you read the last paragraph. The Shekinah comes into the tabernacle, which represents Jehovah's accepting what has been done. So if Jehovah came into the tabernacle I can from that rationally conclude what?
Everything's done by faith.
Everything.
He explained.
Everything fit the pattern. Nothing missed. All right, then we move to look at the veil. Verses 31 to 35 of Exodus 26. Then chapter 36, 35 and 36, the making, it having been made. A veil, and the word veil, which occurs 17 times in all, always used of the screen, separating the most holy from the holy place, was to be made of blue and purple and scarlet and fine twined linen, with cherubim, the work of the skillful workman. Notice how many references in the tabernacle are to the cherubs. That's interesting. Go to Exodus 27. Look at verse 21. In the tabernacle of meeting, outside the veil, which is before the testimony, Aaron and his son shall tend it from evening until morning before Jehovah. It shall be a statute forever to their generation on behalf of the children of Israel. Notice where the lampstand is said to be. Everything's in reference to the veil. Either inside or outside the veil. Go to Leviticus 16. Jehovah said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place, now notice it, inside the veil, before the mercy seat, which is on the ark, lest he die. That veil was a dividing line. Go to 2 Chronicles chapter 3. 2 Chronicles 3, verse 14, Solomon's building the temple now. And he made the veil of blue, purple, crimson, and fine linen, and wove cherubim into it. Now, notice the veil, a dividing line. Old-timers, you have sermon outline books, you'll probably find a sermon, God's dividing line. And often references to water in the Bible are used as a dividing line. And baptism being the final water that separates or divides the lost from the saved. But the curtain, the veil, was a dividing line. And certain people could not go beyond that veil. Only one. And at only a specified time. Now, certain people could come close to it. Where the ark of incense, altar of incense was. Couldn't go beyond. Now, how many of our kinfolk do you reckon would have taken a peek? How many of our members would have said, I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see any sense in that. I'm going in there. I'm going to pay attention to that old preacher Moses. He's just an old fogey. He's not up with the times. I'm going in there. Well, if you live long enough for us to get Leviticus 10, you'll find out how important it was to observe God's dividing lines. And this veil was one of them. Verse 32 of chapter 26, the veil was to be hung upon 4 pillars of acacia, overlaid with gold, to be hung with gold hooks, upon 4 sockets of silver. Notice, 1 gold, 1 silver. Verse 33, the veil was to be hung under the clasps. Number 4 on your outline, one writer said, the one entrance to the Holy of Holies was called the veil, the one entrance. There was only one door into the abiding place of God. There's only one door into the abiding place of God eternally. And Jesus said, I am the door. Then he said, no man comes to the Father but through me. Make a difference then. Number 5, the veil will have a significant role in the New Testament. So turn to Matthew 27. Well, before you do that, turn to Matthew 23. I think we would do well to tie these two together. Jesus spends the first 30, well, he spends all basically of this chapter, but especially the first 33 verses, condemning the Sanhedrin, national Israel, scribes and Pharisees, calling them what? Hypocrites, play actors. All right, then he said, verse 34, I send you, the apostles, or I sent you, Israel, prophets, wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth. Then he gives parameters. From the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. And then he says something like, verily, verily, truly, truly, amen, amen. Assuredly, I say to you, all these things will come upon whom? All right, so that tells you that and everything the world will do with us. See that? Everything the world will do with us. These things, killing the prophets, the wise men that God will send, will come upon national Israel. All right, now, look at verse 37. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Now that's, when you say something twice in the Bible, why is it there like that?
No wonder.
For emphasis. And you're about to teach an important lesson. Remember Jacob. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets. See, Jerusalem here is personified as a person. National Israel. Kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. You would not. It was not your will. Now, as a hen or gathers her chicks is what figure of speech?
Protective.
It's a what? What figure of speech? You do. It's a simile. How you know that? As. No, you know it because you've learned that when you see as, If you just know it because I told you, you don't know it.
Simple.
You will fail the exam. If you were in Professor Kingsfield's class, he would shroud you. So together as a hen, see? All right? And then you have a circlet word there. What is it? So what? I heard it, I think. The but, which says, you have a contrast. I would, see, I wanted to, or I would have, or whatever your translation says. My will was, but your will would not have it. See the contrast there? Everybody see it? Anybody not see it? It's that contrast that leads to what I'm about to try to point out to you. Now, in verse 38, notice, I was willing, but you were not willing. See, you have behold there. Your house is left to you desolate. What is your house? That's the temple. You tie it in with Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the capital of Judaism. Your house, the temple, is left empty. Now this is just before his crucifixion. For I say to you, you shall see me no more, till you say, oh, how blessed is he who comes in the name of Jehovah. Then, I tell you anything? Don't click. Then Jesus went out and departed from what? All right, you mark your house and you mark temple, connect. Where is Jesus? In the temple. What's he call it? Your house. Now when he cleansed it, he called it what? God's house. There's been a change. And Jesus in verse 2 says this temple is going to be so completely destroyed that one stone won't be left sitting on another. And then he gives the signs by which Christians and faithful Jews could recognize it couldn't happen to anybody else. Where was I? I think I was in Jerusalem talking about the destruction of the temple. Now that's down through verse 35, chapter 24. And that's all the destruction of Jerusalem. Has absolutely nothing to do with us. These days are not still coming because you can't tell summer from winter. All that you hear on radio and television among the premillennialists. Now, what do you have that begins verse 36?
But.
All right, you have a contrast. With the destruction of Jerusalem, you have the contrast, and he moves to the second appearing. So you begin in verse 36, and you go all the way through chapter 25. So you don't click at 25. Because you're talking about when the Son of Man comes. The second appearing. Jesus said, your house is left unto you desolate. Well, what does that have to do with the veil? Turn now to chapter 27 of Matthew. Verse 45. Now from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, see the ale in Eli, Eli, ale, my God, Why have you forsaken me? Some of those who stood there when they heard that said, This man is calling for Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a reed, and offered it to him to drink. The rest said, Let him alone. Let's see if Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. What does that mean? So what's the Bible definition of death? Separation of the spirit, the soul, and the body. And who or where is the first illustration or example or event that gives us that definition? Rachel. And that's found in Genesis. And would you start about chapter 35, you think? And somewhere about verse 18. So it was, as her soul was departing, and then parenthetically, she died. There's your first example of the Bible definition of death. Soul and spirit depart. That's free. Doesn't have anything to do with the veil. Thank you for knowing that. Now you get down to their seeing. Jesus cried out with a loud voice, yielded up his spirit. Then, behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two. Now see, we've just seen how this veil is made. One piece. It's torn in two. From top to bottom. That's significant. It could have just said it was torn in two. It could have been torn from bottom to top, couldn't it? Nod your head this way. It could have been torn from bottom to top. But there was a reason top to bottom. I don't know what it was, but when the Bible says something, there's a reason. It says it that way.
But
Huh?
is this God carrying him into?
I can tell you what the text says. The veil of the temple was torn in two.
Earthquake. And
Yes.
rocks.
Were split, and the graves were open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep, what does that mean? Died, were raised, and coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. Some people believe they got out right then and went into the city. The text says after his resurrection. Split, torn in two. Your house is left to you empty. The veil torn in two, which would indicate with what's taking place here, in just a few days, God will no longer dwell on the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies. About 50 days from now, that happens. The inauguration of the church. Then you get to Hebrews. Well, let's take 10 and then we'll come back to Hebrews. All right, speaking about the veil, we were going now to Hebrews chapter 9. If you want to understand the imagery of the book of Hebrews, you need to understand what we're reading here and how things were and how they were built, what they looked like. But more particularly, you need to understand the book of Leviticus. Leviticus and Hebrews are twin books, if you please. And if you understand what we're reading here in the latter part of Exodus, starting chapter 20 on, and you get a good grasp of Exodus and Leviticus, Hebrews will mean so much more to you. And in my judgment, that's where over the years we've had a failure. Is that we've had people who have dealt with Hebrews, but they didn't have the background, didn't have the backdrop of the tabernacle itself. So some of this imagery may not be as vivid as it could have been. Now, I've told you in reading Hebrews, start in 1:1 and don't click. So we're in the middle now of a developmental thought. Now, this is the main point of the things we're saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. Now, Hebrews 1 started with Jesus being seated on the right hand of God. A minister of and here we have sanctuary, which literally means the holies. We're at Hebrews 8. I said 9, didn't I? I'm still waiting on the phone to go on. One excuse is good enough. I'm sorry, Hebrews 8. A minister of the sanctuary and of, look at this, the true tabernacle which the Lord erected and not man. All right, we're studying the tabernacle man erected. There is a true tabernacle that answers to it, type, antitype, which the Lord erected. For every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices. Therefore it is necessary that this one, and the New King James here capitalizes one, also have something to offer. For if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, since there are priests who offer the gifts according to the law. That would be the Levitical priesthood. In Hebrews, you're going to have a contrast of two priesthoods. The Levitical priesthood and the priesthood of Christ. And Hebrews shows the priesthood of Christ is superior to the priesthood of Levi. Therefore, the law of Christ is superior to the law of Moses. That's your point. Because these people in Hebrews, remember, were being pulled back from Christianity into Judaism. And they were going back to Judaism to avoid the persecution of the Judaizers. And Hebrews is written to try to save them. So the Hebrews emphasis is there's a better way. You see the word better all the way through Hebrews. There's a better priesthood. There's a better sacrifice. Go back to Judaism, Hebrews chapter 10, there is no sacrifice for sin. And these priests offer according to the law. Now notice who serve the copy and shadow of the heavenly things. So the law of Moses and the tabernacle and the worship was pointing toward a heavenly pattern. As Moses was divinely instructed when he was about to make the tabernacle. For he said, see that you make all things according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. Back right here in Exodus 25, 40 and 26 and forward. But now he has obtained, here's one of them, a more excellent ministry, inasmuch as he is also mediator of a better covenant, which was established on better promises. For if that first covenant, now that's the law of Moses. Now, I mention that because if you're not careful, you will think patriarchy was the first covenant. That's true in dispensation, but not in Hebrews. The first covenant in Hebrews is the law of Moses. If it had been faultless, then no place would have been sought for a second. Because finding fault with them, he says, behold, the days are coming, says Jehovah, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. And it quotes from Jeremiah 31 and following. Drop down to verse 11. In that he says a new covenant, he has made the first. King James here says what? Least.
Are you talking about where it says? No, that's.
Verse 13. In that he says a new covenant, he's made the first
Old.
old. All right, the New King James obsolete. Now what is becoming obsolete or old and growing old is ready to vanish away. See, he's saying to them, you folks under Judaism are serving something that's gone. Your house is left unto you desolate. So if something is old and is obsolete, and you have a better that is there to take its place, then the old is ready to vanish away when the new comes. And that happened on Pentecost. Now you have chapter 9, you have then. See how it just keeps on? Then indeed, even the first covenant had ordinances of divine service and the earthly sanctuary, for a tabernacle was prepared. See, when you read that, you tie it in with 8:5, a tabernacle was prepared according to the pattern shown Moses on the mount. The first part, in which was the lampstand, the table, and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary, the holy place, literally the holies. And behind the second veil, the part of the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer, that could be referring to the altar of incense. And the ark of the covenant, overlaid on all sides with gold, in which were the golden pot that had the manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim of glory, overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot now speak in detail. Now the reason it sounds like the Ark of the Covenant's in the holy place is because the veil separates them, and you wouldn't know that if you don't go back and read the pattern. But reading the pattern, you know that it's not in the holy place. It's not on this side of the veil, it's on the other side. So you can understand what he's saying. Then go over to chapter 10. Beginning in verse 19. Therefore, all of you have a therefore there, so that you know what that tells you. Having boldness to enter the holiest. Normal people under the law couldn't enter the holiest. The only way they could enter the holiest was by the blood of a lamb, which they gave to the priest himself. They couldn't go. Having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he consecrated for us, notice that, through the veil, that is his flesh. And having a high priest over the house of God, let us draw near. Now our high priest has gone into the holy place, the most holy place. He's removed the veil. So now through his blood we can go directly to the holy place, the most holy place. And he says, draw near. Now draw near was Old Testament language for present a sacrifice. Draw near to Jehovah, people drew near to Jehovah by bringing a sacrifice. We draw near to Jehovah because Jesus is the sacrifice. He's already brought it. I don't have anything to bring. Y'all with me? Questions? And then he says, let's be sure we're pure. Because you had to be pure. See, the priest had to bathe in the laver before they went into the holy place. They had to go in clean. All right, questions or comments now on the making of this veil and the signification of it. When you get to chapter 36, verses 35 and 36, you will see that it was made according to the pattern. And we keep on emphasizing that. According to the pattern. All right, now back to Exodus 26, verse 33. And you shall hang the veil from the clasps. Then you shall bring the ark of the testimony in there behind the veil. The veil shall be a, what do you have there? Shall divide. Be a divider for you between the holy place and the most holy. So there's God's dividing line. Nobody can go in there but the priests. The priest had a dividing line beyond which they could not go. The high priest could go 2 times, 1 time a year. And that's the only time he could go. He would go first and offer for the priesthood. And then he would go a second time on that Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16, and offer for the people. That's the only time he could go. That veil's a dividing line. Well, so is the door of the tabernacle. It's a dividing line. And then you have the door of the court. That's a dividing line. The people couldn't go any further than the door of the court. So you have God's dividing line. It should be a divider for you between the holy place and the most holy. You shall put the mercy seat upon the ark of the testimony in the most holy. All right? Veil separated, number 3 under B. Separated between the holy place, the most holy place. In Leviticus 24:3, it's called the veil of the testimony. In Hebrews 9:3, it's called the second veil. Little a, there is no word for place in the original. This is simply called the holy, Kodesh. Hebrews 9:2, it's called the Hagiah, reverend, worthy of veneration. Used of things which on account of some connection with God possesses a certain distinction and claim to reverence, as places sacred to God which are not to be profaned. And this was called the first tabernacle. Hebrews 9:2 and 6. So you had the holy place. That's in here. And the holy place. All right? Then you would have the veil. This cutaway is to show you the most holy place also. There'd be a veil hanging there. Altar of incense, right there. And the holy place, or shadow of the church, has the dimensions, 30 feet by 15 feet. Table of showbread on the north side, the lampstand on the south side, the altar of incense, just before the veil. So see, when they offered the incense, it would filter into the most holy place. And it would be this statement that you have about the sacrifices, that God would, it would be a sweet smelling savor. Right? The book of Revelation tells us the prayers of the saints was like the incense. But instead of going into the most holy place, prayers of the saints would go into heaven. So see, our prayers go directly to God through Christ. That makes sense? Right, then you have the most holy. Literally, it's holy, holy. Kodesh, Kodesh. It's an example of polyptoton. I know those of you who took hermeneutics with me, you had that on the tip of your tongue, you really tell me. It's an example of polyptoton, which is a repetition of the same word in the same sense, but not in the same form. A noun is repeated in the genitive plural in order to express, if you mark in your notes, to express very emphatically the superlative degree. And that degree did not exist in the Hebrew language, so they would say the word holy, holy. They would have an emphasis in words. If you turn to Leviticus 16, we read this, similar thing to it, verse 2. Tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil. All right, you see place in italics. Come into the holy. And here it's referring to the most holy. Before the mercy seat, which is on the ark. It's called Kodesh HaKadeshim, the Holy of Holies, in Exodus 26, verse 33. The New King James calls it most holy. In Hebrews 9:3, this is the most holy, is called Hagiah Hagion, translated the Holy of Holies by the American Standard, the holiest of all by the New King James, sanctuary by the King James, and the most holy place by the English Standard, referring to this place, the most holy place. In Hebrews 9:7, this is called the second tabernacle. Now, we read a moment ago, this is number 4 on your outline, the flesh of Jesus is an antitype of the veil. Then you get to 26:34, the mercy seat is to be put upon the ark of the testimony. So, Monty, you're bringing this tonight, really helps us. You have the mercy seat on the ark of the testimony. What is the testimony? No, what is the testimony? It's the ark of the testimony. The 10 words. 10 commandments. In the most holy place. Number 4, the table of showbread was to be put without the veil on the north side of the holy place. And then the candlestick was to be put without the veil over against the table on the south side of the holy place. So you have this setup. So you have the candlestick, you have the table of showbread, you have the altar of incense, you have the veil, then you have the most holy place, and in it you have the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. Makes sense to you? Any questions or comments on that? So if you get in a mental picture, see, of this, then you think about, we offer prayers to God in the church, which John in Revelation likened to the incense going up, being smelled by Jehovah. When we're talking about Jehovah smelling, what do we have there?
Anthropomorphism.
Anthropomorphism, because God doesn't have a smeller, doesn't have a nose. Lady at the post office the other day said to me, "You smell good." I said, "Thank you, I use both nostrils." God does not have a smeller. So you have an anthropomorphic expression attributing a human characteristic to deity, by which he accepts the offering going up. All right? When our prayers come up to him through Christ, he accepts them. And I don't know why that is not a compelling argument for not praying to Jesus, but praying to God through Jesus. I don't know why people have trouble seeing that. But some good Bible students do. All right, any questions now on holy place, most holy place? Any comments? All right, then we go to the entrance to the tent. Verses 36 and 37. You shall make a screen for the door of the tabernacle, woven of blue, purple, and scarlet thread, and fine woven linen made by a weaver. And you shall make for the screen 5 pillars of acacia wood, and overlay them with gold. Their hooks shall be gold, and you shall cast 5 sockets of bronze for them. All right, you make a screen for the door of the tent. So you have your veil, then you have your screen, you have your door. And the veil there refers to the entire tabernacle building. You have a door to the entire tabernacle building. And again, you have how many entrances? One entrance. And it is called the door. It's called the door of the tabernacle. Now, what do you learn in teaching people from that? What do you learn about how you need to teach people?
There's only one way, John.
Well, that's the spiritual application. That's true. I'm talking about you're teaching people, and you talk about the door of the tabernacle. What do they see in their minds? A door like we have. So what do you have to do? Come on, teachers.
Explain it.
If you can show them a picture. And that's where your resource room comes in. Especially with boys and girls. But even more so with men and women. We hear the word. Visually, we get the picture of a doorknob and a door. Here you have a curtain. So there are times you have to explain things. Like to my generation, most of us, you'd have to explain a sheaf. I never saw a sheaf of grain stacked out in the field. Never seen one. We didn't do it that way on our farm. And when I was a boy, when we sang bringing in the sheaves, my mind said bringing in the sheets, and I saw Mama getting them off the clothesline. That's what I was hearing, that's what I was seeing. And I was totally seeing a whole different ballgame. So when you are teaching, and you folks who are preaching, you've got to remember the boys and girls, and remember what they're visualizing. That's one of the points I've tried to make with having the Lord's Supper and the contribution just back to back like that. Not making any differentiation. Boys and girls don't see the break. So we need to be careful in how we teach what we teach, so people can understand. So there's your door, not a literal door as we know it.
That must have been the shoes, what we thought was shocks.
Shocks, yeah.
Shocks, you ever do that?
Y'all would have called them shocks. So we didn't do
Tie
that.
them around, you know.
So we didn't shock it.
Go back and get that.
Yeah, we didn't do that. Ma'am?
I was trying to tell her what the sheaves was.
Okay.
It was what we would call like if you had the sticks of the corn out and tied it.
And some people call them a shock.
Yeah, a shock. Yeah, a shock.
Well, now my question to you is, were you successful in helping her see that?
Well, I think so.
That's the key, see?
I know.
See,
We
if
all
we're,
teachers.
that's right. If we're not successful, we've got to back up and start over. That's why I say things like, are you with me? If not, I need to back up and start over. See, my philosophy is this: it does you absolutely no good to come to class if you don't understand what I'm saying. Stay home, watch television, put your feet up and go to sleep. You're wasting your time if you don't understand what I'm telling you. And that's true of anybody, any preacher, any teacher, wherever you're. So make it clear, make it plain.
Well, sometimes it takes a little bit before it gets in there.
It does.
I mean, you know, it's
And
not,
that's
it's
why-
not clear as mud sometimes.
That's why one of the greatest educational tools of learning is repetition. Repetition. You keep going over it. Keep going over it. Some of the things our people here hear. Those who were here when I came here have heard it for 17 and a half years. Just keep going over it. Keep going over it. Because you're always bringing in new people. But that doesn't mean we all retain it. Sometimes I need a reminder. Oh yeah, I'd forgotten that. I need a reminder. Thank you for going over it again. See? So it's never, I'm too lazy to do my work, so I'm not coming up with anything new. It's that's the way you teach. That's the way the Bible taught. That's the way Jesus taught. 5 pillars were to be made for the screen, and they were to be made of acacia, overlaid with gold. Notice here we're back to gold. The hooks were to be made of gold, and 5 sockets of brass were to be cast for the hook. So you have to have something that's going to hold that thing up there. So you have it on hooks, and you have the pillars that are made to hold it. Now you think about these sockets that had to be made, the pillars had to fit down in them correctly. Up here, down there, all had to fit together. Now you think about Solomon building the temple. And Hiram and his people cut the timber everywhere in the temple so precisely that the text says the sound of a hammer was never heard in the building of that temple. It was fit together the way it should have. There are some things that are just so remarkable that sometimes we just read through. Just read over. And we don't let it just really grasp us. All right, any questions or comments on chapter 26? I meant to put this out at break and I did not, so my faithful hander-outers. Now, the introduction, majority of it we've covered. So we want to move to the altar of burnt offering. Chapter 27, first 8 verses. Now if you go to chapter 30, verse 28. You have to be anointed with the holy anointing oil, the altar burnt offering. We have reference to it there. Exodus 31, verse 9. You have the altar of burnt offering. Here's where they're building. These artisans are coming together. Chapter 35, verse 16. You have the altar of burnt offering with its bronze grating, its poles, and all its utensils. Chapter 38, verse 1. He made the altar burnt offering. Tells how it was made. Now go to Leviticus 4. And Leviticus 4, 1 through 5:13. And then Leviticus 5, 24 to 30 deal with the sin offering. And in Leviticus 4, verse 7, you read, the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of sweet incense before Jehovah. Now that would mean what? Before the Holy of Holies, okay. That's one way to say it. Another way, yeah. Another way. No, there's one more.
In His presence, He can see it.
I'm sorry?
In His presence, so that He can see it
Yes,
before the Lord.
yes. I'm fishing.
According to the pattern?
No, before the veil. Before the veil is what I'm fishing for. I wasn't putting the bait out there very carefully on this. Which is in the tabernacle of meeting. And he shall pour the remaining blood of the bull at the base of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. All right, drop down to verse 10. As it was taken from the bull of the sacrifice of the peace offering, and the priest shall burn them on the altar of the burnt offering. Verse 18, he shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar, which is before Jehovah, so that would be which altar? At chapter 4 of Leviticus, verse 18. Yeah, that'd be the altar of incense, which is in the tabernacle of meeting, and he shall pour the remaining blood at the base of the altar burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So you have these references to the altar burnt offering. Now I'll give you 7 things under A regarding this. Number 1, it's also called the bronze altar. You may have the brass altar. Let's see if you do. Turn to Exodus 38:30. Brazen, yeah, okay, brass altar, the brazen altar. It's also called the altar of Jehovah your God. Deuteronomy 12:27 and 26:4. Leviticus 1:5. He shall kill the bull before Jehovah, and the priest, Aaron's son, shall bring the blood and sprinkle the blood all around on the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 2. 2:28. 1 Samuel 2:28. Did I not choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon my altar, to burn incense, and to wear an ephod before me? Offer upon mine altar there as a reference to the altar of burnt offering. Look over to Isaiah chapter 60. And verse 7. All the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered together to you, the rams of Nebaioth shall minister to you. They shall ascend with acceptance on my altar. So Jehovah referred to the altar of burnt offering as my altar. Look at 2 Chronicles 6, verse 22. If anyone sins against his neighbor and is forced to take an oath, and comes and takes an oath before your altar, and your, in the New King James, is capitalized. I don't know if it is in King James or not.
It says thine.
Before thine altar, is thine capitalized? Okay. Before your altar in this temple. So it's called your altar. Now, in Lamentations, who wrote Lamentations?
Jeremiah.
Thank you. Who said it? Say it.
Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit. Who do we believe to be the human writer?
Jeremiah.
Jeremiah. That was not a trick question. Lamentations 2, verse 7. The Lord has spurned his altar. He has abandoned his sanctuary. Now, if you go back to Exodus 20, 24, an altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you and I will bless you. And if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone. For if you use your tool on it, you have profaned it. Nor shall you go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. The altar burnt offering is probably not the altar mentioned in Exodus 20. That altar may have been used as they traveled toward Canaan and was replaced by this one when the tabernacle was built and erected. Remember, I hadn't said this in a while, remember Jehovah meant for them to leave Egypt and go directly where?
Canaan. Sinai.
All right, that's where they are right now. Then he expected them to leave Sinai and go directly to where?
Canaan.
He did not intend between here and here for there to be 38 and a half years of walking around the circle. So what they build here within a few days should have been in here. And I think we all know why, but to know it, study Leviticus 13 and 14. you have this brazen altar. It's to be made of acacia wood overlaid with bronze. It measured 7.5 feet long, 5 cubits broad. It was to be 83 cubits high, 4.5 feet. Verses 1 and 2 of chapter 27. And the bronze would protect it from the continual fire that was kept burning on it. Stood east of the tabernacle. That's your tabernacle. When you get to Leviticus 9, you'll find the fire was miraculously kindled, and it was never to go out. The fire was kept burning. Of course, it would have to go out when they moved it. God didn't intend for them to move it, but one time, from here to here, they were to keep the fire burning. Now, how they did that, probably in some container where the fire could be continued. It was to be kept burning. Horns were to be made, verse 2 of chapter 27, upon the 4 corners of the altar. And they're to be with one piece of the altar, so they're to be a part of this piece of the altar. You have horns there. And we are going to spend a little time talking about the horns. So we'll drive a peg down here, and Lord willing, take up there next time. Thank you for coming.